911, where's your emergency?
My nephew, Ryan Champion, just came to my door, and his wrists have been tied with duct tape, and I haven't been able to find out what's wrong. And you need an ambulance, Ryan? Okay, need an ambulance?
Okay.
Right across the road from me. Who's over there, Ryan? Nobody now. I'm going to take him over across the road. I'm going to go over there with him, okay?
Okay, ma'am. 911, where's your emergency?
Oh, please, run over. My brother has been shot. And his wife, Joy. My nephew is here, and my niece has been shot.
State troopers received the call just before noon Sunday. When they arrived on the scene, they found 62-year-old Lindsay Champion, his 60-year-old wife, Joy, and their 31-year-old daughter, Emily, all shot to death.
As was another man whom investigators have not named. They're not saying whether they believe he killed himself or whether one of the victims shot him.
The pastor of the family's church says the couple's son, Ryan Champion, survived that shooting.
As we approached the house, it looked very well kept, very nice residence on a very, very nice piece of property. When I got closer, I saw the body of Lindsay Champion outside.
He had a lot of blood coming from his head. In the basement, I observed Joy, face down, kind of in the fetal position, but on her knees with her head on the ground. There was an obvious bullet hole in the storm door.
We went into the living room. I saw Emily Champion duct taped, lying in the floor.
She had duct tape wrapped around her face, her feet, her ankles, and her hands. And I was just thinking, why she taped so much? It was overkill. And it didn't make sense.
As we entered the dining room area, there was an unidentified male.
He was laying on the floor with a bullet hole right in the middle of his face and a roll of duct tape by his shoes. We were able to identify through an ID that was in his wallet as Vito Riservato. He was a 22-year-old male that had been residing in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. At that point, he was suspect number one. And I can remember standing there thinking, why'd you do this? What caused you to flip your switch and come in here and kill all these people?
The Champions were very well known in the community. Joy was a longtime teacher who everybody loved.
Joy was so well loved, she was honored as Teacher of the Year. Lindsay Champion was the director of a credit union, and he had cattle.
They had a large farm operation, and they were both very successful at what they did.
Their daughter, Dr. Emily Champion, is a veterinarian in Louisiana. Her particular love was for horses.
Emily was very smart, very ambitious, had a very successful career, and very well liked in the community.
The biggest question was why? Why did this happen?
He's claiming self-defense, and when you have that, you got to take it at face value until you kind of dig in deeper and get into the details.
Give me some backstory to where everything started.
The first time I ever met this guy was in a work-type situation.
Do you know his name?
Vito. At the time, my relationship with him didn't last very long at all. I brought him over here one day, and Emily was here, and I was just here to pick up my laundry. And apparently the whole time that I was upstairs and downstairs getting my stuff together, he was hitting on Emily. Creeped her out, apparently.
About how long ago did all this stuff happen?
Thursday.
Ryan said that was enough to fire him. But he said that the day after Ryan and Vito had gone to Ryan's parents' house, that Vito had showed up back at the Champion residence.
When I came yesterday, Mom said she was spooked. She said that basically he just said he was out of gas. Can I talk to Emily? Why do you want to talk to Emily? And he said he just thought she was the prettiest girl in the whole world. Cheesy. And she said Dad took him out, got him some gas, and that was just it. And I was thinking, well, that's pretty messed up that I fired the guy and he comes back here.
About what time did you get here today?
9:30-ish.
Okay. All right.
So, me and Emily are just hanging out. God, I'm shaking. Vito comes in and he's got the gun that I've got set out on the counter. I just had it sitting there.
What did you have it sitting there for?
I was going to talk to Emily about the importance of, hey, for one, this dude really liked you. For two, he talked about creepy stuff. And for three, he came to the house.
Was it your gun or your father's gun?
It's my dad's gun.
Okay. All right.
All right. And he walks around the corner and he says, that if I do anything, he's going to shoot Emily. And then he goes in, he tapes us up. He wasn't trying to break anything or steal anything. He just wanted to talk to Emily.
Did he have the gun in his hand the whole time he was talking?
Yes. That's when Mom and Dad came home. He ran outside. Me and Emily trying to get free, and that's when we heard the first gunshot. It's still at that point, I thought he had fired off a shot to scare somebody. And then I heard a second one in a different place. Before I could think, he runs back inside, doesn't say a word, and shoots Emily. He's out of bullets, he reloads, and I made my move. I pushed him back up against the wall. As soon as he broke away, bam. It was just that quick.
His story that he told just kind of sounded very odd. Was it going to be a kidnapping? Was it going to be a robbery? Well, what was going on? When you're dealing with a victim, everybody responds differently to traumatic situations. But it sure makes you want to look at him a little bit more. The weapon that was used in these murders was a .45 caliber 1911 model handgun. We were able to retrieve it and take it as evidence. She told me when he ran across the street, Ryan was still duct taped around his wrists, and she had cut the tape off and it was in the trash, and she allowed us to retrieve it and take it as evidence.
There's really no comparison that could be made on the amount of duct tape that Emily had on her body versus what Ryan had around his wrists.
Also, the tape should have rolled towards Ryan's thumbs and hands because it was taped, around his wrists, and there didn't appear to be any stretching. And we're talking about fighting for your life and fighting a gun away, and he didn't show anything like that.
The questions really started going in my head at that point.
We do a neighborhood canvass, and while doing that, we're able to locate a Ford Explorer in the woods adjacent to the Champion residence. The vehicle came back to a Vito Riservato, who we were able to identify in the kitchen. It was parked in a spot where you wouldn't know that there's a parking lane there because of the trees and the foliage. So that was something we had to look into.
I will never forget Detective Miller sitting in front of the residents as we were discussing what Ryan Champion had said and what we had seen so far at the scene. Him saying something isn't right here.
Okay, Ryan, we're at the Cadiz Police Department. If you could, start from the beginning.
At this point, he's either innocent or guilty. So we needed to really look at him more and lock him in a story.
When people saw the Champion family, they saw a lot of love. Lindsay and Joy decided to adopt a baby who was a few months old at the time, and that baby was Ryan Champion.
And several years later, Emily was born.
They were very proud of Emily. She was a young, vibrant woman, and she had her whole life ahead of her. They were an idyllic family. There was a lot of love, and this came out of nowhere as far as the community was concerned.
You got to go back days for the actual start of this.
Okay, start from the beginning.
All right, I met this guy. His name is Vito. I was up in Hopkinsville. There's an old friend of mine who I was seeing, and my friend Ann pulls me to the side and says, he didn't have a place to stay that night. It's like I saw a guy who definitely seemed like he was down on his luck, and he's a single father, and that's kind of what touched me to try to help this guy.
Okay, let's start off when you got there today. You said you arrived about 9 o'clock, right?
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about that in detail.
So I get one of the guns out. I've got it sitting on the counter. I'm getting ready to have a discussion with Emily about, hey, look, you need to be aware of this situation.
You took the gun out. Where did you retrieve the gun at?
The gun belongs down in my dad's gun area.
It's in the basement there, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where the safe's at. I seen it.
Yeah.
And was it on a shelf?
Oh, yes. They keep on the top.
So you walk upstairs, and where did you put the gun at?
On the countertop.
He told a story, and he gave his version of events. I didn't discard it as not true, but I didn't necessarily buy it either. Something weird's going on, but to what extent we didn't know.
Did you have any involvement in either your father's death, your mother's death, or your sister's death?
No.
You were just a victim like they were, correct?
Correct.
I'm going to end this right now. Like I said, we're going to talk in the future. 24 hours.
Vito had no criminal history. I don't even remember seeing a speeding ticket. We executed a search warrant on Vito's truck. In the backseat ashtray, we found .45 caliber shell casings. And they were the same brand and caliber that was actually used in the shootings. We just wondered, what if that handgun had been fired and produced those empty shell casings? Why would they be in Vito's truck if Ryan didn't hardly know Vito and Ryan was in possession of the handgun? So we thought, okay, well, let's send these off to the lab after we photograph them. But it could take weeks or months. Ann Plotkin came up in Ryan's initial interview. So we went and talked to her.
I'm here with Ann Plotkin, and I'm also here with Detective Miller. You said you seen him about Thursday, Friday?
He popped in, but I haven't seen him in a while. I haven't seen him in a long while.
Now, you introduced Ryan and Vito. Was it before Thursday? Or?
No, it was. I'm trying to think now. That was. Maybe it was. I don't know. They've only known each other maybe a week. Tops, maybe.
We knew within a few minutes of talking to her that she was full of it. She only was telling us what Ryan told us, almost verbatim, and she didn't deviate from any of that. We walked out looking at each other after we shut the door, grinning.
She was lying.
Ann knows a whole lot more about this than she's telling us. We were determined to figure out what her involvement actually was.
You had actually contacted us. Why don't you tell us what information you have?
Roughly 6 years ago, Ryan Champion came to my house, and then he started talking about how he hated his parents and how they've been doing him wrong and how he hates his sister. Then he laid out this little idea he had about killing his entire family and how he wanted me to take part in it. He even said he would give me $20,000 after he got inheritance or whatever the hell was going on. Well, I thought he wasn't serious. Well, after I saw the news story, I think he was telling the truth. I guarantee Ryan Champion pulled the trigger on all 4 of them. And I'm hoping the pieces of the puzzle prove it.
Now, you also know Vito, too, right?
I knew Vito very well. He lived with me for a few months. He dated my daughter.
Where do you think you met?
At my wife's house. My estranged wife's house. And Plotkin, that's right. My wife and Ryan known each other 8 years or better. They started having an affair. That's why we're getting divorced. They had an ongoing affair that I was unaware of for a long period of time. Ryan and Ann. Which is why I'm thinking he was trying to set me up to be the fall guy when he was talking to me.
So that was very big. Made us feel that there was a deeper connection between the two, connecting them even further with their involvement in this case. So we made a trip to Waffle House. We're getting the video ready. And we found the date and time roughly, and we started looking, and all of a sudden we see these people come walking through the door. And there's Ann. And then there's Ryan and there's Vito. And they walked over to a booth. Now that was on the 21st of October. And Ryan, in all of his interviews so far, said he had only met Vito on the 23rd. So he's obviously deliberately lied to us about how long he had known Vito.
Things were adding up, but in order to arrest someone on a felony offense, you need probable cause.
In a perfect world, we wanted a confession. Detective Silphy said he'll never confess. He's never going to come off of it. So we need to have Ryan come back and walk through the scene and have him demonstrate what happened. And so we called and asked him, and he was all about it.
Okay, good. Just do what you did that day, and just you could tell me what you're doing.
There is a lot of pressure. Is he gonna talk enough that we can build a case on him based on his lies?
I'd come in that morning. I was conveniently late to miss being asked to go to church, and Emily had conveniently slept in.
And the whole idea of the walkthrough is to see if he can stay with his story while demonstrating what happened. He was very excited to do this, but he had an edge of nervousness.
You know, I came in with a gun. I had a talk with Emily. Is like, do you understand? You know that.
No, you came in with a gun?
Yes. No.
And from where?
And from outside. The gun was in my truck. It was Dad's gun. I had it. It was the gun that I used when I went anywhere for work.
Okay. I must have understood you, because in the interview you said you went downstairs and got the gun off a shelf.
Oh no, I said he kept it. Well, that's where he kept it and all of his guns. So when I didn't have it, that's where it was.
And there you go. There's an inconsistency. We're about 30 seconds into this. Ryan couldn't keep his story straight on where it came from that morning.
Just do it the way you did it, right in my hands, about as many times as you did.
All right, now what I was doing was, I thought I was being a little bit smart, I was kind of like holding my wrist out a little bit.
What, like that?
Yeah, kind of.
For the purpose of the walkthrough, we told Ryan that he's going to be Vito. And Detective Silfies was Ryan, and I was Emily. And we wanted him to show us the manner in which they were both taped up.
Where did you cut it off then?
He usually, he either tore it or he did his teeth. With me, he said, hold tight.
Okay, what did you do next?
All right, now give that a try.
We didn't really question him in a authoritative way. It was all, oh really, okay. I'm just curious how you did this. And he's more than happy to show us.
Take your tape off.
Well, that's the question. You're focused on there. Well, you know, the tape comes off if it's like that.
Oh, well, I mean, I didn't like tape you tight or anything.
I told you to tape it the way it was supposed to.
You want me to?
But what really, really stood out was it took very little effort for Detective Silfies to get out of the duct tape. When Ryan was questioned about that, they did it again.
Like I'm about to drop the gun in a minute. All right. All right.
Ain't nothing to be nervous about, man. You're the victim here.
It just, I don't know. All right.
Come on. Don't be nervous. Do it like you did it to you.
All right.
You're fine.
Hold still. All right. He wasn't like as careful with her. He was doing it more quickly.
All right.
I guess because he figured, you know, at first, you know, he just, you know.
But his attention's all focused on you. I mean, not on her, right? You know, that's just it. All you gotta do is twist your hands and it comes out. Because you're sweating.
I sure didn't do that though.
Yeah. Well, keep going.
Yeah, keep going. For him to so nonchalantly reenact what happened just a few days prior to this to his family was pretty shocking. I was ready to, confront him about it, and Detective Silfies was saying it's not time yet. We just wait and let him dig the hole deeper.
Put her down. He kind of halfway tripped her.
All right. Where does she go? Right here?
She goes right here.
Here. This room. Okay.
She goes right here. He gets her down. He gets her down. She goes down. And he just kind of like straddles her. Emily's like kicking around and everything, squirming. I mean, not actually like fighting, but she's really resisting, trying to get out. And she's squirming, and she kind of works herself where she's kind of like wedged inside of this doorway, and he's just straddling, riding. This is one of those times where I just wonder if I run over. And I didn't.
It looked more like acting than emotion. My personal opinion and the opinion of family is that Emily would have kicked Vito's tail, even if you had a gun. I think it took both of them to get her corralled and get her taped up, because I think she would have fought tooth and nail.
Once I got the gun away from you, there you go. I mean, we're still locked up like this, and he has started to grab me with that hand, so you haven't got me grabbed, but, well, all right, here we go. All I gotta do is hold it like this. I know exactly. And push it back.
As he's trying to demonstrate here how he got it away from him, he just can't make it work. And he's kind of laughing. I think he thinks, and I've tried to show them what happened, and this isn't working. It is I'm in trouble after.
Have I done an okay job? I'm not the best explainer in the world. I never have been.
Every time we talked to him up to that point, it was very casual, really not questioning him on anything. And this time we wanted to start kind of putting pressure on him.
And looking at the case out there, there's a lot of things that have popped up in our investigation we want to iron out.
Of course.
All right. The whole gun thing.
First you told me that you went to the basement and retrieved the gun, because we went over it. Did you get it out of the safe?
I actually said that I retrieved it.
Yes, you went down to the basement to get it. Talked about it for a while, and then today you told me you brought it.
Gun being in your car versus downstairs in the basement in your dad's gun room, I'll call it.
Correct.
Okay, that's an inconsistency that popped up today.
Correct. Well, the thing is I did a bad job of explaining.
That's not a bad job of explaining. It's totally opposite.
I thought, no, your communication skills are fine. You just happen to have killed your family, and you don't want to tell us what happened.
Let's go on to the next one. This one is what I'm curious about.
Okay.
The duct tape. We seen today on the reenactment earlier.
Yeah, that y'all could get it.
Yeah, it wasn't that hard.
Yeah. And the thing is, I suppose I could have too, but it just wasn't. I wasn't thinking that.
Okay, he's paying a lot of attention to your sister,
Mm-hmm.
and you could have just ran out the side door. Why didn't you do that and go for help?
No way.
Why?
Well, my sister's there.
Did you love your sister?
Yes.
Did it cross your mind at all you wanted to just rip his head off and piss down his throat for doing that to your sister?
Yes, and that's what made that so difficult. But if I had run at him from across the room and failed, your card's played. Why play your only card when you can't be sure it'll work?
Because if you don't, you're probably going to die anyway. We towed Vito's vehicle post. Okay, and we searched it. And we found the very same shell casings that we found at your house in the back of his vehicle. Spent. We sent those off and we had them tested against the gun, and the shell casings we found in the cup holder in the back seat of Vito's Explorer were fired from the gun you had in your possession that day. And we can't figure that out, man. We're stuck.
And that was the ruse, because we were really confident that they were going to match. We had a working theory that they planned the murders at the Waffle House, and Ryan gave Vito the handgun to go do some target shooting.
We don't understand how that's the case.
Could he have stolen my gun out of my truck?
You tell us. You said you never lost it anyway, so that didn't happen. It wasn't lost.
Well, I mean,
did y'all go target practicing?
No.
Okay. Now that's a speed bump. We're just gonna have to figure out what happened there. Why he has used your gun to shoot stuff.
He must have taken it out of my truck.
When?
How? I don't know.
You could see the wheels start turning in his head. He didn't know they were in that truck. If he did, he forgot about it. And then he had to come up with some other way that happened.
Okay. What about Waffle House?
Waffle House.
You ever been to Waffle House with him?
Let me think. Yes, one night with him and Ann.
Why'd you leave that out?
Well, it's just, I don't remember that. That's a petty detail.
Ryan, that's Vito we're talking about, all right? That's the guy that killed
the guy you told me on Sunday you met one time.
I know, but you gotta, that was
Ryan.
before. That was when he was just a layabout presence.
No, that's not. It's just you and her and him. It's not layabout presence.
It seems like they were doing a lot of talking at the table.
Y'all were chatting it up, chatty Cathy, man.
Well, that's kind of what I do.
Look.
I remember, it took you saying it to jog my memory that I even went to Waffle House with you.
You left out being with the guy that killed your entire family.
But I didn't, how could I have known that at the time?
Is it possible you gave him the gun to kill your family?
No.
That's not possible.
No.
How did the shell casings get in his truck?
I don't know.
Well, I think I do.
I think I do too. Well, we've been waiting for you to tell the truth here.
And all you're doing is walking in circles. You're dancing in a circle here. Okay? Man up.
Look, the only thing I can think of is he might have stolen it. He must have stolen it.
Do you think anybody with half a brain is going to think that he stole it and brought it back?
Maybe.
No, they're not, Ryan.
It's go time. We want him to know that we know what happened, that he's involved in it. Because we felt that if we didn't get it this night, that we probably wouldn't get it at all.
You're in a quandary. This looks bad because it is bad. Your whole family's dead and you're alive, Ryan. You got out of there without a mark. Listen to me, don't talk. The gun that was used to kill your family was given to Vito by you for whatever reason. I don't know if it was for money or what, but you gave Vito that gun to come and assassinate your family, okay? They didn't deserve that. And you could only make that right by being honest.
All I ever did was try to help that kid.
The evidence doesn't suggest.
I did that all the time. That's what I do. I help out. I bring food.
Listen to me. You didn't help your mom, your dad, and your sister.
There's a reason I have that reputation. My dad was the same way. He'd help anybody.
Your dad's dead because of you, Ryan.
My dad is not dead because of me.
Yes, he is.
No, you can't be serious right now.
Hey.
You can't be serious.
Let's get down to the nitty-gritty. The duct tape was so minimal on you and so maximal on your sister, it made no sense. And your story today didn't make any sense. Listen, it's not believable, all right? It's not believable. The only guy that survives is you, all right? Your sister was shot 3 times. Your mom and dad are dead. The guy that, in my opinion, you brought in there to do all this stuff, you killed. I believe that happened. But look, Ryan, listen to me. You see how this looks? See where this is going? And then, yeah.
Can I go out and smoke, please? While y'all have a minute.
You're gonna come back and tell the truth.
During the smoke break, he told Detective Silfies that he didn't want to talk anymore. He wanted an attorney. But I think he knew that with everything we had, that he had no other alternative but to stop talking at that point.
Ryan, I happened to give him some contact information. While we were outside, he had asked for an attorney. He was getting
Guys, look, y'all have both been decent and fair with me throughout this whole process. I think up until tonight, and I know this isn't a requirement for the job, but one thing it definitely wasn't was nice, or it was not courtesy.
I understand that, Ryan, but killing your family ain't nice either, brother.
And I've got a job to do, and so I don't really care if he thinks I'm nice or not. I want to get to the bottom of what happened.
You've got test results to come in, and what you're basing these opinions on is something that nobody can know. What he was thinking, what he was knowing.
Based on evidence.
And
evidence doesn't lie, brother.
I mean, just put simply, if y'all have this...
Let me just have a minute with Detective Miller. I'll be back in. That's for your lawyer. I'm not asking any questions.
Okay.
We had suspicion that Ann might be involved in the planning or even the execution of these murders, and she just agreed to come in and talk.
Hey, I got a couple of questions for you. Thank you for coming in.
We want to see if she'd let us see what's in her phone, messages between her and Ryan or her and Vito, because we didn't have any records back at the time.
Do you have any messages there between you and Ryan?
No.
You
Except
don't?
for maybe
Okay, now
one
here's-
or two text messages.
Would you mind if I looked at it?
I don't see why.
You don't see why I would want to, you don't see why not.
No.
Well, we're working a murder investigation. There might be something that'll help us. You want justice, don't you? Is there a reason you don't want me looking at the phone?
Because it's my personal stuff.
Okay. But it might vindicate your buddy Ryan. Or you're hiding something. Would you mind if I looked at the message between you and Ryan?
You did.
But a yes or a no?
Okay, he asked if I had groceries, if I'd eaten.
All right.
And Vito was on the job site there,
Where does it say that?
right here.
What job site?
When
Vito's
he,
face is getting cold
Yes.
at the work site. You got anything he could wear, okay?
yeah,
What day is that?
That's the
23rd, he was there at the job site
What job site?
where they were working on the floor and the tile and crap.
Okay.
She was obviously trying to skip past stuff that she thought would make her or Ryan or Vito look in a bad light.
What on that phone are you hiding from us?
I ain't hiding crap, that's just it. I
But
showed
why did you stop
everything.
right there at the 23rd?
Because there was nothing else there.
There was more down there, you
No,
stopped.
there was not.
Okay, let me tell you now. If
Ever.
the phone records come back and there's stuff between you and you're hiding, you're gonna be charged.
Okay.
Okay.
Because there ain't nothing there.
All right. That's how you want to go, that's fine. But you're
Well,
trying
I'd like to know why Ryan's lying again. He couldn't have been
About what?
he wasn't at a job site with Vito on the 23rd.
No, I wasn't with him.
But you won't let me look at your phone.
Like I said, it's my personal stuff.
I was sitting in trial in another murder case, and I thought, what if the duct tape can tell us the order who was taped when? Because I've had some training that you can place duct tape back together like a torn piece of paper.
Ryan was always consistent that he was taped first by Vito Reservato and that he could not assist his sister because he was taped first.
I got the roll of duct tape from evidence, and I got the tape cut from Ryan's wrist, and lo and behold, it was a perfect match. So we know Ryan was taped last, which goes against his story.
we knew that we had enough to charge him with murder.
Ryan Champion came into court Monday shackled after investigators charged him with capital murder and kidnapping. That's something his friend, Ann Plotkin, refuses to believe.
I don't understand it. I really don't, because I know Ryan and know there is no way.
Ryan was in jail, but the investigation's not even close to over. I was pretty obsessed with the case, and I went through thousands of pages of records. There was never direct communication between Ryan and Vito, but there was direct communication from Vito to Ann to Ryan and back and forth.
When we got that information back, we knew that Ann Plotkin had assisted in the planning of the murders. I think she loved Ryan. I think Ryan used her, and that's how she came to have participated in this. I will never forget how horrible it is that a adopted child who Joy and Lindsay had given a great life committed this horrendous crime.
Joy, Lindsay, and Emily were just sweet people who wanted to do good in their community.
There's no penalty severe enough for taking Joy, Lindsay, and Emily's lives. Nor is there penalty sufficient for the anguish we've endured.
People talk about closure, but I don't even believe in that. I think it's an open wound that never really goes away.
The call came in just before sunrise, when the sky over Ohio was still bruised purple and the town was suspended in that fragile moment between night and morning, when everything feels quieter than it should. A dispatcher's voice cut through the stillness, flat and urgent. And within minutes, the first patrol car rolled down a residential street where nothing ever happened, tires whispering against asphalt, headlights washing over mailboxes and trimmed hedges, unaware that this calm stretch of road was about to be branded by a phrase it would never escape: cold case. The house stood at the corner, modest, well-kept, the kind of place that blended perfectly into the neighborhood's rhythm. No broken windows, no splintered door. The porch light was off. The front door, inexplicably, was unlocked. That detail would echo for years, replayed in interviews, whispered in kitchens, highlighted in police reports, because unlocked doors make people uncomfortable. They suggest invitation, or confidence, or familiarity. And familiarity, in cases like this, is where danger hides. Inside, the air felt dense, like it had been sealed overnight. Officers stepped carefully, instinctively lowering their voices, as if the house itself might be listening. Furniture was untouched, a chair pushed neatly under the table, personal items resting exactly where they were supposed to be. No chaos, no noise frozen in time, just stillness, and at the center of it, a life abruptly interrupted. Her name would soon circulate everywhere, on the news, in reports, in conversations spoken with hushed intensity. But in these first moments, it was said softly, almost reverently. She was in her 30s. She had roots here. She had habits that made her predictable in the safest way. Morning coffee, evening walks, friendly nods to neighbors whose names she sometimes forgot, but whose faces felt familiar. She was not someone people worried about. She was not someone people watched closely. And now she was gone. By mid-morning, the street was crowded. Squad cars lined the curb. Detectives arrived with tired eyes and notebooks already half full from other cases they hadn't finished yet. Crime scene tape fluttered slightly in the breeze, a thin barrier between normal life and something darker. Neighbors gathered in clusters, arms crossed, voices low, glancing toward the house and then at each other, searching for reassurance that no one could provide. Someone said they had seen her the night before, walking toward her front door. Someone else thought they heard a car late, maybe around midnight, maybe later. Another neighbor insisted everything had been quiet. These early statements were taken carefully, written down, categorized, even as everyone involved knew that memory is slippery, especially when fear sharpens it. Time stretched, compressed, reshaped itself into competing versions of the same evening. The first headlines were cautious. A woman found dead. Investigation ongoing. No suspect named. No threat to the public, officials said, even though they couldn't explain why. The town absorbed those words uneasily. No threat, but no answers. Safety declared without proof. Trust asked for without explanation. Inside the house, investigators documented everything, especially the absence of the expected. No signs of forced entry. No obvious weapon. No defensive wounds. No ransacking. It was a scene that resisted interpretation, and scenes like that have a way of haunting the people who work them. Violence usually leaves fingerprints in behavior. This one left restraint. Evidence was collected with care, bordering on desperation. Fibers lifted from carpet. Hairs sealed in plastic. Samples taken for DNA analysis that, in 1994, still felt more like promise than certainty. Technology was advancing, but slowly, and everyone involved understood that science might not be able to speak clearly yet. Still, they gathered everything. Because sometimes the future solves what the present cannot. Interviews stretched into the evening. Family members arrived in shock, clinging to each other, answering questions they barely understood. Friends struggled to reconcile the image of the person they knew with the finality now being described to them. Co-workers repeated routines, trying to offer investigators something solid, something usable, even as it all felt painfully ordinary. Detectives chased the obvious angles first. Recent relationships, past conflicts, anyone who might have wanted to hurt her. The problem was that no one fit cleanly into that narrative. She was not embroiled in drama. She was not hiding secrets that surfaced easily. Her life, at least on the surface, was quiet, predictable, safe. As the sun set on the first day, exhaustion settled in, but urgency did not. This was the window, everyone knew it. The hours when people slip up, when guilt rattles nerves, when lies fracture. Patrol cars cruised the neighborhood again, slower this time, scanning driveways, parked vehicles, anything out of place. Nothing stood out. Everything looked exactly as it always had. Vigils appeared within days. Candles flickered along the sidewalk, their light reflecting in tearful eyes. Community leaders spoke about unity, about healing, about looking out for one another. The words were sincere, but beneath them ran a current of disbelief. This wasn't supposed to happen here. Not like this. Not without explanation. The investigation pressed on. Tips flooded in. Some were earnest. Others were fueled by suspicion newly awakened. A former boyfriend. A stranger seen at a gas station miles away. A vehicle that didn't belong. Each lead was followed, weighed, tested. Most collapsed quickly. A few lingered just long enough to raise hope before dissolving into nothing. Weeks turned into months. Lab results trickled back, frustratingly incomplete. DNA samples existed, but they didn't match anyone in the system. Not yet. Profiles sat in storage, labeled, preserved, waiting for a future that no one could predict. Detectives adjusted strategy, returning to interviews, re-listening to recordings, searching for inconsistencies that might have been missed the first time. Pressure mounted quietly. From the family. From the community. From within the department. This was becoming the case people asked about in hallways, the one that refused to move forward. Every unanswered question added weight. Every day, without progress, pushed it closer to a category no one wanted to name. By the second year, the word cold case began to surface cautiously at first, then more openly. It was spoken with frustration, with regret, with a sense of failure that felt personal. The file grew thicker. The active leads thinned. Detectives rotated off. New ones rotated on, inheriting binders filled with other people's handwriting, other people's assumptions. The house changed owners. Fresh paint covered old walls. New furniture filled the rooms. Life resumed, but the past clung stubbornly to the address. People still slowed down when they drove by, still remembered, still wondered. For the family, time became something else entirely. Birthdays came and went. Holidays lost their shape. Grief settled in layers, heavy and persistent. They learned to answer questions from strangers who felt entitled to details. They learned to endure the long silences between updates. They learned that hope, stretched too thin, can hurt almost as much as loss. Every few years, something stirred. A new detective revisiting old evidence. A tip sparked by a late-night documentary. A confession from someone seeking attention. Each time, the case inhaled, then exhaled disappointment. Still, it did not die. It waited. Because somewhere, in the ordinary flow of life, someone carried the truth of what happened in that quiet house in 1994. Someone went to work, shopped for groceries, exchanged pleasantries, blended in. And the Ohio 1994 cold case remained open, unresolved, a silent presence woven into the town's identity, patient, enduring, waiting for the moment when time itself would finally turn against the person who thought they had escaped it. Time did not move cleanly after that first year. It dragged, uneven and resistant, as if the town itself were reluctant to leave 1994 behind. The Ohio cold case settled into everyday life like a low, persistent hum, audible only when everything else went quiet. People stopped talking about it openly, but they never stopped thinking about it. It lived in pauses, in glances held a second too long, in the way conversations shifted when someone new joined the room. The absence of answers became its own kind of presence. Inside the police department, the case file occupied a shelf that drew the eye without asking for attention. Thick binders, color-coded tabs, photographs already beginning to fade at the edges. New detectives flipped through it with a mix of curiosity and caution, aware that this was not just paperwork but accumulated frustration. Every page represented a choice already made, a direction already explored, a question already asked and left hanging. They started again anyway. That was the only option. Interviews were revisited, not because anyone expected witnesses to suddenly remember something new, but because memory changes when time passes. Details once dismissed as trivial can acquire weight years later. A tone of voice, a hesitation, a sentence that didn't quite land right the first time. Detectives listened for what had been said too easily and for what had been avoided altogether. Neighbors who had grown older, grayer, more cautious, sat at kitchen tables and tried to reconstruct a night that no longer felt real. They spoke about routines that had since changed, about doors they locked now but didn't then, about sounds that might have been ordinary or might not. Each recollection was shaped by what had happened afterward, by knowledge that did not exist at the time. The past was being filtered through fear. One detail refused to disappear: the lack of forced entry. It returned in every discussion, every strategy meeting, every theory sketched out on whiteboards late at night. Whoever had entered that house had done so without resistance. That narrowed the field, at least in theory. It suggested trust, familiarity, or deception skilled enough to simulate both. None of those possibilities were comforting. Investigators examined her relationships again, this time with a colder eye. Friends, co-workers, casual acquaintances, people who had reasons to be close without drawing attention. They searched for fractures in otherwise calm interactions, moments when boundaries might have blurred. But nothing rose to the surface strongly enough to hold. Technology continued to inch forward, promising clarity just out of reach. The DNA evidence, preserved carefully, became a kind of talisman. It existed. It mattered. It simply didn't speak yet. Profiles were partial, incomplete, frustratingly anonymous. The database was small in the mid-1990s, and each year that passed without a match felt like time slipping through fingers. The case was reassigned more than once. Each transfer brought renewed energy, followed by the same slow erosion. Detectives brought their own instincts, their own interpretations, their own biases. Some focused on the idea of an outsider, someone passing through, someone gone before anyone thought to look. Others returned obsessively to the notion of someone local, someone hiding in plain sight. The evidence refused to commit to either. Media attention faded, then flared briefly whenever an anniversary approached. Short segments, old photos, interviews with family members who had learned to speak carefully, to manage expectations, to protect themselves from the cycle of hope and disappointment. The phrase unsolved cold case became standard, almost dismissive in its familiarity, as if labeling it reduced its urgency. But for those closest to it, nothing felt settled. The family measured time by what had been missed. Birthdays without calls. Holidays without her laugh. Ordinary moments that carried a hollow edge. They followed every update, no matter how small, learned to read between the lines of official statements, learned to brace themselves for silence. Within the department, the case developed a reputation. It was the one that resisted simplification, the one that didn't reward shortcuts. Younger officers heard about it as a warning. Do not assume. Do not rush. Do not ignore what doesn't fit. It became a lesson embedded in institutional memory, even as its specifics blurred. Years accumulated quietly. The neighborhood changed. Children grew up and moved away. New families arrived, unaware at first of the history beneath their feet. Eventually, someone always told them. A passing comment, a rumor, a late-night internet search. The story resurfaced, unsettling but distant, like an echo from another life. Then almost imperceptibly, something shifted. Not a breakthrough, not a revelation, just a change in context. The early 2000s brought expanded DNA databases, improved analysis techniques, a broader understanding of how to extract meaning from fragments once considered useless. The evidence from 1994 was re-examined, not with optimism, but with stubbornness. Lab technicians worked quietly, methodically, aware that expectations were low. Samples were retested. Partial profiles were refined. Data was compared against a database that had grown far beyond what anyone in 1994 could have imagined. The process was slow, bureaucratic, unglamorous. There were no dramatic phone calls, no sudden gasps, just waiting. At the same time, detectives revisited behavioral patterns. They mapped routines again, this time overlaying them with years of hindsight. They asked questions that had not been relevant before. Who benefited from silence? Who stayed close without being questioned? Who seemed helpful, attentive, present, but never quite involved enough to attract suspicion? The idea of proximity began to feel heavier. The quiet neighbor, the familiar face, the person no one thought to scrutinize because there was nothing to scrutinize. This wasn't an accusation yet. It was a concept, a reminder that danger does not always announce itself. The case refused to cooperate with neat timelines. Leads surfaced out of order. Clues gained significance retroactively. Detectives learned to sit with uncertainty, to let threads dangle without forcing them into patterns. It was uncomfortable work. It demanded patience few cases require. There were moments when the investigation seemed to breathe, to stir, as if something was about to break open. A tip came in from someone recalling a conversation years earlier, now reframed by age and distance. A memory sharpened by guilt. An offhand comment that, when placed beside old evidence, produced a faint spark. Enough to keep going, never enough to conclude. The family felt these shifts instinctively. Phone calls came more often. Questions sounded more specific. There was a change in tone, subtle but unmistakable. They learned not to ask what it meant. They learned that expectation could be dangerous. By the late 2000s, the Ohio 1994 cold case existed in 2 states at once, dormant to the public. active in fragments behind closed doors. Detectives worked it alongside fresh crimes, fitting it into the margins of their schedules, refusing to let it disappear completely. It was no longer urgent, but it was still unfinished. And somewhere, woven into the routine of ordinary life, someone continued to live with what they knew. They aged. They adapted. They watched technology advance. Laws change. People forget. They told themselves the past was sealed, buried under years of silence and procedural inertia. They underestimated time, because time, slow and unremarkable, was doing its own work. It was expanding databases. It was loosening memories. It was shifting perspectives. It was eroding the confidence of someone who believed they had been overlooked forever. The Ohio 1994 cold case did not move forward with a bang. It inched. It waited. It accumulated pressure quietly, patiently, until the conditions that once protected the truth began, almost invisibly, to fall apart. The breakthrough did not arrive with drama. It did not announce itself. It crept in through a routine update, buried inside a system designed to catch patterns no human eye could hold for long. A partial DNA profile, long considered too weak to matter, was quietly reprocessed against a database that had grown exponentially over the years. Millions of names, millions of samples, the kind of scale that turns probability into inevitability. And somewhere in that vast digital landscape, something finally shifted. At first, it was nothing more than a statistical tremor. Not a match. Not yet. Just a consistency. A similarity strong enough to raise an eyebrow, weak enough to demand caution. Analysts leaned closer to their screens, recalculating, rerunning, stripping emotion from the process because emotion has no place here. The numbers held. Not certainty, but promise. The kind that keeps people in their chairs long after the building empties. The profile did not point directly to a suspect. Instead, it gestured outward toward a family line. A relative. Someone connected by blood, but not yet by name. This was a new frontier of forensic work, unfamiliar, controversial, powerful. Genetic genealogy. It required patience, discretion, and a willingness to navigate ethical gray zones. It also required secrecy. If word leaked too soon, whoever was responsible might vanish, or worse, adapt. Detectives were notified quietly. No announcements, no celebrations, just a closed-door meeting, a single slide on a screen, and a long silence as everyone present absorbed what it could mean. After decades of waiting, the case had twitched. Not solved, not cracked, but alive again. They moved carefully, aware of how fragile this moment was. Family trees were constructed piece by piece, names branching outward, timelines layered over relationships. Birth records, addresses, employment histories, people who had lived near Maple Drive in 1994, people who had not drawn attention, people whose proximity suddenly mattered. One branch began to feel heavier than the rest. A cluster of relatives tied to the neighborhood. Ordinary lives, unremarkable paths. And within that cluster, one individual kept resurfacing, not because of anything dramatic, but because of consistency. They had lived nearby. They had stayed. They had aged in place. The quiet neighbor. It was a phrase that landed softly, but stayed. Investigators revisited old notes, scanning for mentions that had once seemed irrelevant. There it was. A name that appeared occasionally, always in passing. Cooperative, polite, forgettable. The kind of person who answers questions without resistance and leaves no impression behind. The kind of person investigators are trained to look past. They did not rush. That mistake had been made before, in other cases with disastrous results. Instead, they observed. They pulled public records, employment logs, utility bills. They mapped movements not just in 1994, but in the years that followed. There were no red flags, no arrests, no documented violence. The absence was unnerving. Surveillance began quietly, not because there was proof, but because there was potential. Detectives watched routines unfold with almost anthropological detachment. Grocery runs, morning commutes, Small talk with neighbors who had no idea their street was under renewed scrutiny. Everything looked normal. That was the problem. The family was not told yet. It was too early. Hope had been raised too many times before, only to collapse under the weight of reality. This time, investigators wanted something solid, something undeniable. DNA alone was not enough. It needed context, motive, opportunity, confirmation. They returned again to the house on Maple Drive, now altered by years of living. They studied old photos, reconstructing sight lines, entrances, blind spots. They asked themselves how someone could enter without force, without noise, without resistance. The answer kept circling back to trust, or at least to the illusion of it. The quiet neighbor had been known to her. Not close, not intimate, but familiar. A wave across the yard. A brief conversation about weather or mail or trash pickup. Enough to lower defenses. Enough to open a door. Investigators replayed interviews from the 1990s, listening now with different ears. There was again the neighbor's voice. Calm, cooperative, almost too smooth. At the time, it had meant nothing. Now it sounded rehearsed. Not false exactly, just controlled. Still, suspicion is not proof. And the burden of proof in a case this old is immense. Memories fade. Evidence degrades. Doubt multiplies. Detectives knew that one wrong move could unravel years of quiet progress. They needed confirmation that could not be argued away. They waited for an opportunity. It came in the form of something mundane. A discarded coffee cup, a cigarette butt, a paper napkin tossed casually into a public trash can. The kind of thing no one thinks twice about. But investigators did. They collected it discreetly, logged it carefully, sent it to the lab with instructions that were both routine and momentous. The wait that followed was excruciating. Days stretched. Calls went unanswered. Everyone involved pretended to focus on other work, knowing they were lying to themselves. This was the moment the case had been inching toward for years. Either it would collapse again, or it would finally speak. When the results came back, there was no fanfare. Just a report. A match. Not partial. Not suggestive. Definitive. The DNA from the crime scene and the DNA from the trash were the same. The probability of coincidence was astronomical. The science was clear. The quiet neighbor was no longer just a concept. They were a suspect. Silence filled the room where the report was read. No cheers. No relief. Just the weight of realization settling in. Decades of ordinary life had coexisted with this truth. Someone had lived freely, quietly, while a family waited and a town wondered. Plans moved quickly after that. Warrants were prepared. Timelines synchronized. There would be no announcement, no warning. The arrest would come the way the crime had, quietly, deliberately, without spectacle. Midnight was chosen not for drama, but for control. As the hour approached, detectives reviewed the plan again and again. There was no room for error. This was not just an arrest. It was a collision between past and present, between what had been hidden and what could no longer remain unseen. The neighborhood slept unaware. Porch lights off, streets empty, and inside one unremarkable house, the quiet neighbor lived the final hours of a life built on the assumption that time had done its work. They were wrong, because time, patient and relentless, had been gathering evidence, refining tools, aligning circumstances. And now, after 30 years of waiting, the Ohio 1994 cold case was no longer cold. It was poised on the edge of revelation, seconds away from breaking the silence that had protected the truth for far too long. Midnight arrived without ceremony. No sirens cut the air. No lights flashed against bedroom walls. The operation unfolded the way the crime itself had, with restraint and precision, a quiet choreography rehearsed until every movement felt inevitable. Unmarked vehicles rolled to a stop along the curb, engines ticking softly as they cooled, doors opening and closing with controlled patience. The house was dark. The neighborhood slept. Time, after decades of waiting, finally chose to move. Detectives took their positions, breath visible in the cold Ohio air. The warrant felt heavier than paper. It carried years. It carried doubt. It carried the knowledge that once the door opened, nothing would ever return to the way it had been. A knock came first. Firm, deliberate. There was a pause long enough to wonder if anyone would answer. Then footsteps. Slow, unhurried. The door opened a fraction. The quiet neighbor looked exactly as expected. Older now, grayer, ordinary to the point of anonymity. There was confusion in their eyes, but not panic. Not yet. The words were spoken clearly. Police. Warrant. Arrest. The fraction widened into a door fully open, and in that moment, the past stepped into the present without asking permission. Handcuffs clicked shut with a sound that felt louder than it was. Neighbors would later insist they heard nothing. No shouting, no struggle, just a car door closing softly, and then the street returning to stillness. By morning, rumors would spread, but for now, only a handful of people knew that a 30-year silence had just been broken. At the station, the tone remained subdued. No victory laps, no raised voices. This was not triumph. It was reckoning. The suspect was processed methodically, photographed under fluorescent lights that revealed lines time had etched into their face. They said little. When they did speak, it was measured, polite, the same controlled calm that had once helped them blend in. Interrogation began with facts, dates, addresses, proximity. The detectives did not rush to accusation. They laid the timeline out piece by piece, watching for fractures. The suspect listened, eyes fixed on the table, hands folded neatly, posture composed. Decades of normalcy had trained them well. They knew how to appear cooperative. They had done it before. Then the DNA was mentioned. The shift was subtle, but unmistakable. A blink held half a second too long. A breath drawn deeper than necessary. The science was explained plainly, without embellishment. This was not a bluff. There was no need. The evidence did not require persuasion. It existed independently of belief. Silence followed. Not the silence of confusion, but the silence of recalculation. The kind that happens when a carefully maintained internal narrative collapses and must be rebuilt in real time. The suspect asked for a lawyer shortly after. The interrogation ended. The truth, at least for now, retreated behind legal boundaries. News broke later that morning. Carefully worded statements. Confirmation of an arrest in connection with the Ohio 1994 cold case. No name released immediately. The community absorbed the information with a mix of disbelief and grim recognition. Solved. After 30 years. The phrase felt surreal, almost inappropriate, like using the wrong tense for something that had lived so long in uncertainty. When a name was finally released, shock rippled outward. The quiet neighbor. The person everyone recognized but no one really knew. Someone who had attended barbecues. Who waved. Who borrowed tools. The revelation didn't feel explosive. It felt destabilizing, as if the ground had shifted just enough to make everyone question their footing. Neighbors replayed memories obsessively. Conversations that now seemed loaded. Moments of casual kindness reframed as camouflage. People asked themselves how they hadn't seen it, even though there had been nothing to see. The ordinariness became the most disturbing detail of all. The family was notified privately, away from cameras and microphones. They received the news with a stillness that surprised even them. Relief did not rush in. It arrived cautiously, uncertain of its welcome. For years, they had lived with questions. Now, they were being offered answers, and answers carry their own weight. They asked about evidence, about certainty, about whether this could fall apart the way other leads had. Detectives answered carefully, knowing that trust had been eroded by time. DNA does not waver, they explained. The match was conclusive. This was real. Court proceedings followed, procedural and restrained. The suspect appeared older than most remembered, hair thinning, posture slightly stooped. They entered pleas. Lawyers spoke. Dates were set. The machinery of justice resumed its slow, deliberate motion, grinding forward after years of dormancy. Media coverage intensified, then fragmented. Some outlets focused on the technology, hailing DNA as the hero of the story. Others leaned into the psychological angle, dissecting how someone could hide in plain sight for so long. Few captured the full complexity. Fewer still acknowledged the years of quiet endurance that preceded this moment. As the case moved toward trial, details emerged that filled in gaps once thought permanent. Familiarity, opportunity, a moment when trust was exploited without force or noise. The unlocked door returned to the center of the narrative, no longer a mystery, but a symptom. The house had not been breached. It had been entered. The community struggled with this realization. It forced a reevaluation of safety built on familiarity. The idea that danger wears a recognizable face was comforting. This case stripped that comfort away. It suggested that evil does not always arrive announced. Sometimes it arrives as someone you nod to on your way inside. For investigators, the case brought a strange mix of closure and discomfort. They had answers now, but those answers illuminated years of missed opportunity. Not mistakes exactly, limitations. Technology had not been ready. Databases had been small. The tools that finally solved the case had not existed when it mattered most. Still, the weight of time pressed heavily. The trial approached quietly. No spectacle, no crowds. The evidence spoke in documents, in charts, in probabilities so overwhelming they bordered on certainty. The defense questioned process, chain of custody, the ethics of genetic genealogy. The prosecution returned, again and again, to the science, to the match, to the impossibility of coincidence. Throughout it all, the suspect remained composed. They did not confess. They did not dramatize. They listened. They waited. The years had taught them patience. It would not save them now. When the verdict came, it landed without drama. Guilty. The word echoed briefly, then settled. Justice, delayed but undeniable, had finally arrived. The courtroom emptied slowly. Outside, cameras waited. Inside, the family held each other, emotions colliding in ways no one had prepared them for. The Ohio 1994 cold case was officially closed. Files stamped. Records updated. A line drawn under decades of uncertainty. But closure, like silence, is rarely absolute. It leaves traces. It lingers. Because while the case had been solved, the questions it raised did not dissolve so easily. How many other quiet neighbors existed elsewhere, unexamined, protected by time and normalcy? How many truths waited in evidence rooms, dormant, dependent on tools not yet invented? As the town returned, slowly, to routine, one thing had irrevocably changed. The past was no longer abstract. It had a face, a name, a place at the table where it had sat unnoticed for years. And that knowledge, once introduced, could not be unlearned. The silence that followed the verdict was different from the silence that had come before. This one was heavier, more deliberate. It carried the understanding that waiting had ended, but the impact had only begun. After the verdict, the town expected release. Relief. The long exhale that comes when uncertainty finally collapses into fact. Instead, what followed was something quieter and more complex, a strange emotional aftershock that rippled through everyday life. Justice had arrived, but it had arrived late, and lateness changes the shape of things. The Ohio 1994 cold case was no longer a question, yet it refused to become a memory. Mornings resumed their routines, but with a subtle difference. People lingered at windows a little longer. They looked down familiar streets with new awareness, as if seeing them for the first time. The house on Maple Drive, once a symbol of unanswered dread, became a different kind of landmark. Not a mystery anymore, but a reminder. The paint looked the same. The lawn was still trimmed. Normality felt intact, and that was unsettling. Conversations shifted. At diners and grocery stores, people spoke about the case in lowered voices, not because it was unsolved, but because it was solved. The finality carried weight. Someone always said the same thing. I never would have guessed. That sentence traveled through the community, repeated with variations, each time reinforcing the same uncomfortable truth. Guessing had never been an option. For the family, the days after the verdict were disorienting. They had imagined this moment for years, rehearsed it in fragments, braced themselves for emotions that refused to arrive on schedule. There was relief, yes, but it came wrapped in grief sharpened by time. The knowledge of who had done it did not soften the loss. It clarified it. They spoke privately about how the waiting had changed them, how hope had learned to survive in small increments, how anger had dulled into endurance. The case had defined entire chapters of their lives, and now those chapters were closing without instruction on what came next. Closure was not a door slamming shut. It was a room gradually emptying. Investigators felt their own version of this displacement. Some had retired by the time the arrest was made. Others had moved on to different units, different cities. They watched the conclusion from a distance, experiencing pride and regret in equal measure. Pride that persistence had paid off. Regret that it had taken so long. The case reminded them that justice is often constrained not by will, but by time. Within the department, the Ohio 1994 cold case became a reference point. Not a trophy, but a lesson. Training sessions used it to illustrate the importance of evidence preservation, of patience, of returning to assumptions long considered settled. The unlocked door, the partial DNA, the quiet neighbor. Each detail was dissected not to assign blame, but to extract understanding. The role of technology was debated endlessly. Some framed the case as a victory for science, a demonstration of how far forensic tools had come. Others cautioned against that simplicity. Technology had not solved the case on its own. People had. People who refused to let it go dormant, who believed that time could be an ally instead of an enemy. Media narratives struggled to keep pace with the emotional reality. Headlines celebrated the arrest. Documentaries condensed decades into minutes. Podcasts framed the story with suspenseful music and decisive conclusions. But those closest to it knew that the truth was messy. Resolution did not erase damage. It recontextualized it. The quiet neighbor, now identified fully and permanently, faded from public fascination faster than expected. Once the shock wore off, there was little left to say about them. Their life narrowed to court dates and legal filings. The ordinariness that had once protected them now rendered them unremarkable. This felt appropriate. The story had never been about them alone. Instead, attention turned outward toward the broader implications. People asked how many other cases sat waiting in evidence rooms, their answers locked behind outdated technology. Cold case units received renewed interest, renewed funding. Patience became a virtue again, at least in rhetoric. The idea that justice could arrive decades late gained credibility. Yet the town remained cautious. Trust, once shaken, does not reassemble easily. Familiarity was no longer assumed to be harmless. This did not manifest as fear, but as attentiveness. People noticed more, asked more questions, took nothing for granted. The case had altered perception permanently. The house on Maple Drive eventually changed hands again. New residents moved in, aware of the history this time. They chose to live there anyway, believing that knowing the truth was safer than ignoring it. The house absorbed new routines, new memories layered over the old. The past did not vanish, but it reseeded, becoming context rather than threat. For the family, anniversaries took on new meaning. They no longer marked years without answers, but years since resolution. The difference was subtle but profound. Grief remained, but it was no longer suspended. It moved, slowly, unevenly, towards something resembling peace. The case influenced how people understood waiting. Waiting was no longer passive. It was active, deliberate, necessary. The Ohio 1994 cold case demonstrated that time does not merely erode. It also reveals, but only if someone is willing to keep looking. As months passed, the intensity faded. The headlines disappeared. The cameras left. Life continued. And yet, the story lingered, not as a mystery, but as a reminder of how easily the extraordinary can hide within the ordinary. Because what unsettled the town most was not the violence itself, but its subtlety. No forced entry, no public confrontation, just a door opened, trust extended, and a moment that reshaped decades. That understanding settled deep, reshaping how safety was defined. The case had been solved, but it had not been neutralized. Its lessons remained active, circulating quietly through conversations, policies, instincts. It taught that silence can be strategic, that patience can be dangerous in the wrong hands and powerful in the right ones. In the end, the Ohio 1994 cold case did what unresolved cases rarely do. It closed, but it closed in a way that left an imprint, a faint but permanent outline etched into the town's collective memory. Not as a warning shouted from headlines, but as a whisper that followed people home, reminding them that the past is never as distant as it appears, and that answers, when they finally arrive, do not end stories. They change them. With the courtroom emptied and the headlines already thinning, the case entered a quieter phase, one that rarely makes it into documentaries or news segments, yet defines how a community actually lives with what has happened. This was the long aftermath, the period when answers stopped arriving, but consequences kept unfolding. The Ohio 1994 cold case had closed on paper, but in practice it continued to ripple outward, reshaping habits, memories, and assumptions in ways that were subtle and enduring. Investigators returned to their desks, carrying something heavier than satisfaction. Solving a case after 30 years did not feel like victory. It felt like reconciliation with time. They reviewed their own notes from earlier in their careers, now decades removed, and recognized versions of themselves shaped by limited tools and inherited assumptions. The case forced an uncomfortable honesty, not about negligence, but about blindness, about how easily certainty forms around incomplete information. Some officers admitted, privately, that the quiet neighbor had crossed their minds once or twice in the early days, only to be dismissed immediately. Too normal, too cooperative, too close without cause. Suspicion, they realized, is often guided by expectation, and expectation can be dangerously narrow. The case became a reminder that intuition, unchecked, can become a filter that hides as much as it reveals. Within training programs, the Ohio 1994 cold case began to appear not as a success story, but as a cautionary one. Instructors spoke about how narratives harden early, how the first version of a story can quietly dominate all that follows. Trainees were encouraged to revisit assumptions relentlessly, to treat familiarity with skepticism, to understand that patterns can deceive when they are incomplete. The family moved through this period with careful steps. They had learned not to rush emotions, not to force meaning where none would naturally form. Public sympathy receded, replaced by privacy, and they welcomed it. Grief no longer needed witnesses. They spent time reclaiming ordinary moments, allowing laughter to exist alongside memory without apology. They spoke occasionally about the strange cruelty of timing, about how answers had arrived too late to change outcomes but too soon to be ignored. They understood now that justice does not rewind. It acknowledges. An acknowledgement, while necessary, does not repair what time has taken. The town's relationship with the case evolved as well. What had once been a source of collective anxiety became a shared reference point, a story told carefully, often to newcomers, framed with restraint rather than sensationalism. People no longer asked, "How did this happen?" but "What did we miss?" The shift was important. It replaced fear with responsibility. The quiet neighbor's former home stood empty for a while, not because it was uninhabitable, but because no one rushed to occupy it. When someone eventually did, the transition was uneventful. No protests, no headlines, just a moving truck and closed doors. Life asserting itself without ceremony. Cold case units across the state cited the Ohio investigation as proof of concept. Evidence long considered inert was revisited. Old files reopened. Shelves cleared. The idea that time could be an asset, not just an obstacle, gained institutional support. Budgets followed rhetoric, at least briefly. There was momentum now, fueled by the belief that other answers might be waiting. Yet the case also introduced caution. Genetic genealogy, while powerful, raised questions that did not resolve easily. Privacy, consent, the ethics of identifying suspects through relatives who had done nothing wrong. The Ohio 1994 cold case sat at the center of these debates. Cited by both proponents and critics, its outcome used to justify opposing conclusions. For some, the case represented hope. For others, unease. Both reactions were valid. The truth had emerged, but the method unsettled assumptions about anonymity and exposure. The town, like the broader public, learned that progress often arrives tangled in complexity. Years continued to pass. The case became less present in daily conversation, but it never fully disappeared. It surfaced unexpectedly, triggered by unrelated news, by another cold case reopened, by another arrest made decades too late. Each time, the memory returned with clarity, reminding people that the boundary between past and present is thinner than it seems. The investigators who had worked the final phase of the case noticed something else as well. The silence that followed resolution was different from the silence that preceded it. Before, silence had meant absence. Now it meant completion. The difference was subtle but profound. The unanswered question had been replaced by a known truth, and truth, once established, carries its own quiet. The case also altered how people understood waiting. Waiting was no longer passive endurance. It was active stewardship. Evidence must be preserved. Questions must be kept alive, because time does not erase relevance. It simply delays recognition. As the years stacked up beyond the verdict, the Ohio 1994 cold case settled into its final form. Not a mystery, not a headline, but a reference. A reminder that justice is not always swift, that danger can wear a mask of normalcy, and that answers, when they finally surface, do not bring closure so much as clarity. Clarity, it turned out, was enough. Enough to let the family breathe differently. Enough to let investigators release a burden they had carried longer than they realized. Enough to let a town reframe its past without being consumed by it. The case had waited 30 years to speak. Now that it had, it did not shout. It whispered, steadily and persistently, into the collective memory of everyone it touched, reminding them that some truths do not demand attention. They endure until attention is finally ready to meet them. Time did not freeze after the verdict. It moved forward quietly, relentlessly, carrying the Ohio 1994 cold case with it like sediment in a riverbed, never fully washed away, never fully visible unless the water shifted just right. In the months and years that followed, the story stopped being about the arrest, stopped being about DNA, stopped being about courtroom photographs and official statements. It became something less visible and more permanent, a psychological scar embedded in routine. For the people who had lived inside the timeline of the case from the beginning, the resolution introduced an unfamiliar problem. They had spent decades orienting themselves around uncertainty, around theories, rumors, half-truths, and the constant hum of what if. When that hum finally went silent, the absence felt louder than the noise ever had. Former detectives described it as disorientation. They no longer had a question to return to during sleepless nights. No file left open on the corner of the desk. No mental rehearsal of alternative outcomes. The case had ended, but their minds had not yet adjusted to the idea that it would no longer need them. Some found themselves rereading transcripts, not to find errors, but to stay connected to something that had shaped their careers. One investigator admitted that he still drove past certain locations tied to the case, even though there was no professional reason to do so anymore. Old habits lingered. Routes memorized under stress do not erase easily. Neither do instincts honed by unresolved loss. The victim's family faced a different reckoning. Closure, as the media liked to call it, turned out to be an inadequate word. It suggested a door being shut, a chapter neatly ended. What they experienced instead was reconfiguration. Grief rearranged itself. It did not disappear. It simply changed position. They spoke less about the crime and more about the years around it. Birthdays missed. Holidays altered. Decisions shaped by fear that no longer needed to exist, but had already left their mark. Justice arrived too late to prevent those things, but early enough to force acknowledgement of their weight. In interviews they declined to give and conversations they had only with each other, the family confronted an uncomfortable truth. Knowing who was responsible did not restore what had been taken. It clarified the loss without softening it. Yet clarity, even painful clarity, felt preferable to the endless speculation that had once surrounded their lives. The community continued its gradual shift. The case was no longer a warning whispered to children or a rumor passed at diners. It became an example cited carefully, almost academically. People referenced it when discussing crime statistics, forensic science, or the evolution of policing. The emotional charge faded, replaced by reflective distance. Still, certain details refused to lose their impact. The fact that the suspect had lived nearby all along, that he had blended seamlessly into the rhythms of daily life, that he had been present without being seen. These elements lingered, unsettling precisely because they resisted explanation. Neighbors reevaluated memories that now felt unreliable. Casual interactions replayed in new light. A wave, a brief conversation, a borrowed tool. Moments once considered meaningless acquired retroactive significance, though no new information emerged from them. Memory itself became suspect. Psychologists studying community trauma later noted this phenomenon. When a perpetrator is revealed to have existed within familiar space, the breach of trust extends beyond the crime itself. It alters how people interpret proximity, how they define safety, how they assign meaning to normal behavior. The Ohio 1994 cold case became a case study not only in forensic advancement, but in social aftermath. Conferences referenced it. Academic papers cited it. Yet those discussions often failed to capture the quieter truth. That resolution does not restore equilibrium. It recalibrates it. Cold case units continued their work, energized but also sobered. Each reopened file carried the weight of expectation. Not every case would end with a revelation. Not every box of evidence held a genetic key. The Ohio case was not a template. It was an exception that proved the rule. Persistence matters, but outcome is never guaranteed. This understanding tempered optimism with realism. Investigators learned to measure success differently. Progress became its own metric. Clarity, even partial, became worthwhile. The pursuit itself regained dignity, independent of results. Years later, when asked about the case, younger officers spoke of it with respect rather than awe. It was no longer mythologized. It was contextualized, a reminder that systems improve, but only when challenged by their own failures. The suspect's absence from public life created a vacuum that was never filled with spectacle. There were no dramatic follow-ups, no explosive revelations. His story ended quietly, defined more by documentation than drama. In a strange way, this lack of theatricality underscored the reality of the crime. Real violence rarely adheres to narrative expectations. The house he once occupied faded into anonymity. New paint, new occupants, new routines. The structure remained indifferent to history. Buildings do not remember. People do, and even they remember selectively. Anniversaries passed with diminishing public notice. The dates still mattered to some, but it no longer dominated local consciousness. This, too, was a form of healing, not forgetting, but allowing space for other memories to coexist. Yet every so often, the case resurfaced. A documentary proposal, a podcast episode, a student research project. Each revival prompted careful consideration. How to tell the story without reopening wounds. How to balance education with restraint. Those closest to the case learned to set boundaries. They participated when purpose outweighed exposure. They declined when curiosity felt invasive. The line between public interest and private pain remained delicate. Through all of this, the core truth remained unchanged. For 30 years, a question had gone unanswered. When the answer finally arrived, it altered the past without undoing it. That paradox defined the Ohio 1994 cold case more than any headline ever could. It stood as evidence that time does not erase responsibility. It delays it. That justice, when it comes late, arrives altered by everything it failed to prevent. And that resolution, while necessary, is not transformative in the way stories suggest. The case settled into memory not as a triumph, but as a lesson written slowly across decades. A lesson about patience, about humility, about the limits of certainty, and about the enduring consequences of not knowing, even after knowing becomes possible. The story did not end. It stabilized. It found its place among other remembered things, no longer demanding attention, but always ready to return when silence made room for it. As the Ohio 1994 cold case receded further into the past, something unexpected began to surface. Not new evidence, not hidden witnesses, not a forgotten confession, but a deeper reckoning with how memory itself had been shaped by 30 years of uncertainty. The case no longer lived in police files or court transcripts alone. It lived in the way people remembered their own lives, subtly altered by crime that had hovered over them like low weather, never quite storming, never quite clearing. For many in the town, the case had become a marker of time. Events were recalled in relation to it. Before the disappearance, after the search, during the years when nothing happened. Memory bent itself around absence, organizing personal history around a question that once had no answer. Even after resolution, that structure remained. Sociologists later described this phenomenon as temporal anchoring. When a traumatic event remains unresolved for long enough, it stops being an interruption and becomes a reference point. The Ohio 1994 cold case did exactly that. It reorganized time for an entire community quietly and without permission. Former classmates of the victim spoke of how they had grown older alongside the mystery. They had graduated, moved away, started families, changed careers, all while carrying a version of the case that never evolved. When the arrest finally came, it collided with lives already far removed from who they were in 1994. The contrast was jarring. A past frozen suddenly collided with a present that had kept moving. Some admitted they felt a strange guilt for having lived full lives while the question lingered unanswered. Others felt relief mixed with resentment. Relief that the truth was known, resentment that it had taken so long to arrive. Emotions did not align neatly. They overlapped, contradicted, resisted simplification. The investigation's final report, archived and indexed, became a document few people actually read, but many referenced. It symbolized finality more than it conveyed information. Its existence alone was enough, proof that the waiting had not been meaningless. Inside law enforcement circles, the case continued to influence behavior in subtle ways. Younger investigators, who had never known the town before the case was solved, absorbed its lessons indirectly. Through tone, through caution, through the way senior officers spoke about certainty with restraint rather than confidence. There was less rush to close cases quickly, more emphasis on preserving evidence even when leads dried up. The Ohio case had demonstrated that time, when paired with patience, could reverse conclusions once thought permanent. Yet it also exposed an uncomfortable truth. For every case solved decades later, countless others remained unresolved, their evidence degraded, their witnesses gone, their stories fading. The Ohio 1994 cold case became exceptional precisely because it was rare. That rarity tempered celebration with realism. Public trust in forensic science grew, but so did skepticism. People learned that technology does not replace judgment. It amplifies it. The same tools that can illuminate truth can also reinforce error if guided by flawed assumptions. The case reminded professionals and civilians alike that evidence speaks only when someone is willing to listen differently. The family, now removed from the public eye, continued their private negotiation with memory. They did not seek to redefine the narrative. They simply lived alongside it. The case no longer defined their identity, but it remained part of their internal geography, a place they could not erase, only revisit selectively. They learned to recognize moments when the past intruded without warning. A familiar street, a news headline echoing old language, A phrase like cold case spoken casually. Each instance carried a brief weight, manageable but unmistakable. The town itself changed physically. New buildings replaced old ones. Businesses turned over. Faces unfamiliar outnumbered those who remembered 1994 firsthand. The case shifted from lived experience to inherited story, passed down imperfectly, filtered through retelling. With that shift came distortion. Details blurred. Emphasis shifted. Some remembered the arrest as sudden, others as inevitable. Some recalled the suspect as invisible, others as vaguely unsettling. Memory, untethered from uncertainty, became flexible. Historians would later note that this was the final transformation of the case. From active mystery to resolved event. From resolved event to cultural memory. From cultural memory to legend-adjacent narrative, stripped of nuance, sharpened by repetition. Those closest to the truth understood the danger in that transformation. They resisted dramatization. They corrected misinformation when it mattered. But they also accepted that stories evolve beyond control. Once a case leaves the present, it belongs partially to interpretation. Despite this, certain facts remained immovable. The waiting, the silence, the years without answers. These elements survived every retelling because they were not details, they were the experience. In professional circles, the Ohio 1994 cold case continued to be cited not for its conclusion, but for its duration. 30 years was the figure that lingered. 30 years of not knowing. 30 years of partial truths. 30 years of a question left open. That duration reframed success. Solving the case was no longer the sole achievement. Enduring the uncertainty became part of the story. Maintaining integrity in the absence of resolution. Preserving evidence without guarantee. Holding space for truth long enough for it to emerge. As more time passed, the case stopped resurfacing spontaneously. It required prompting, an anniversary, an academic inquiry, a renewed public debate about cold cases. Each time, it returned briefly, then reseated again, quieter each time. This fading did not signal insignificance. It signaled integration. The case had been absorbed into the larger understanding of how justice operates across time. Imperfectly, slowly, often unevenly. And in that understanding, the Ohio 1994 cold case found its final form. Not as a spectacle, not as a triumph, but as a reminder etched into collective consciousness that some truths are patient, that some answers arrive altered by delay, and that the weight of not knowing leaves marks that remain long after knowing becomes possible. The silence that followed was no longer empty. It was full of context, full of history, full of lessons learned too late to change the past, but early enough to shape what came next. Long after the Ohio 1994 cold case stopped appearing in news cycles, it continued to surface in quieter places where stories are not announced but discovered. In classrooms where criminal justice was discussed without spectacle. In late-night conversations between officers finishing a shift. In family living rooms where trust had been recalibrated but never fully restored. The case had entered a phase where it no longer demanded attention, yet refused to vanish. What lingered most was not the identity of the suspect or the mechanics of the DNA breakthrough, but the years before it. The long stretch of uncertainty became the defining feature, shaping how people understood patience, accountability, and the limits of certainty. The case taught that absence of answers does not equate to absence of truth. It simply means the truth has not yet found a voice. For those who had worked on the investigation at any stage, the case became a reference point for restraint. They learned to speak less confidently about what they knew and more carefully about what they could prove. Experience had stripped away the illusion that time clarifies everything automatically. Sometimes it obscures, sometimes it preserves. The difference depends on how deliberately the present treats the past. Cold case units began to document not only evidence, but reasoning. Why leads were dismissed, why assumptions were made, why certain paths were chosen over others. The Ohio case had revealed how easily context can be lost when only conclusions are recorded. Future investigators needed to understand the thinking of those who came before them, not just their results. This shift in practice marked a subtle evolution. The field moved away from the myth of the lone breakthrough and toward a culture of continuity. Cases were no longer seen as static files, but as living records, capable of being reinterpreted as tools and perspectives changed. The Ohio 1994 cold case had become proof that reinterpretation was not failure. It was fidelity to truth. Outside institutional spaces, the case influenced personal behavior in ways that were rarely articulated. People paid closer attention to the ordinary, not with paranoia, but with awareness. They learned that danger does not always announce itself, and that familiarity can coexist with deception. This realization did not create fear so much as vigilance tempered by humility. Parents spoke differently to their children about safety, less about strangers, more about boundaries, less about appearances, more about intuition balanced with evidence. The narrative shifted from warning to education, from alarm to understanding. The family, now living with distance from the public story, found their own rhythm. They no longer measured time in anniversaries or legal milestones. They measured it in ordinary achievements reclaimed from years once overshadowed by waiting. Their relationship with the case became internal, no longer mediated by headlines or external interpretation. They understood that the case would outlive them in some form, that their loved one's name would remain attached to a story retold by others. This knowledge carried both weight and acceptance. They did not seek to control the narrative. They sought only to ensure it retained its humanity. Occasionally, they were asked what justice meant now. The answer, when given, was simple. Justice meant acknowledgement. It meant that the truth had not been abandoned, even when it was unreachable. It meant that silence had not been mistaken for resolution. The town's collective memory continued to evolve. New residents learned of the case through fragments. A sentence here, a passing comment there. The emotional charge diminished with each retelling, but the lesson endured. This was a place that had learned, slowly, that certainty can be dangerous when unexamined. Urban planners, sociologists, and criminologists all found material in the Ohio case, each interpreting it through their own lens. Yet none of these interpretations fully captured the lived experience of waiting. The years when nothing happened, when hope thinned but did not disappear, when the question remained suspended, unresolved but persistent. That waiting shaped people in ways that could not be quantified. It taught endurance without reward. It taught the discipline of keeping questions alive without expecting answers. These were not dramatic lessons, but they were durable. As technology continued to advance, new tools emerged that made the Ohio breakthrough seem almost primitive by comparison. Faster sequencing, broader databases, more refined analytical models. Yet even as these developments promised greater efficiency, the case remained relevant. It reminded practitioners that tools do not replace judgment. They extend it, and judgment, once flawed, scales just as efficiently as truth. The Ohio 1994 cold case also challenged the idea of finality. Though the legal process had concluded, the story did not feel finished. Not because of doubt, but because meaning continued to unfold. Each generation extracted something different from it. For some, it was about science. For others, about patience. For others still, about the quiet dangers of assumption. In this way, the case resisted closure. It settled instead into a state of ongoing relevance, changing shape as context shifted. This was not a failure of resolution. It was its consequence. Truth, once revealed, does not end conversation. It redirects it. Years later, when asked why the case still mattered, one retired investigator offered a simple answer. Because it proved that forgetting is not the same as moving on. The case had never been forgotten. It had simply waited. Waiting, the case taught, is not empty time. It is charged with potential, with risk, with responsibility. How institutions and individuals choose to wait determines whether truth is eventually met or missed. The Ohio 1994 cold case had waited 3 decades to speak. When it finally did, it spoke quietly, without spectacle, leaving behind not shock but gravity, a sense that something fundamental had been clarified, even if not repaired. That gravity remained, anchoring the story in memory long after interest waned. It was the weight of time acknowledged, of patience validated, of silence finally understood not as absence, but as preparation. And so the case continued, not forward but outward, into policy, into practice, into the way people thought about the past and its claim on the present. It no longer asked for answers. It offered a reminder that truth does not expire and that the cost of waiting is measured not only in years, but in the shape those years take while the question remains unanswered. In the final years after the Ohio 1994 cold case slipped fully out of public conversation, its presence became almost abstract, no longer tied to dates or names, but to an idea that lingered beneath the surface of everyday life. It existed as a quiet understanding shared by those who remembered and an unspoken inheritance passed to those who did not. The case had transformed from an event into a lens, altering how absence, delay, and truth were perceived long after the fact had settled. For investigators who encountered the case late in their careers, it became a point of ethical gravity. They spoke about it not with pride, but with care. It reminded them that every file left unresolved carries forward, not just as paperwork, but as unfinished responsibility. A case does not pause when attention fades. It continues to age, and with age comes both opportunity and loss. Some retired officers admitted that the case followed them into civilian life, not as regret, but as vigilance. They found themselves more patient, less willing to accept easy explanations. The discipline of waiting for evidence, of resisting narrative convenience, had become instinct. The Ohio case had shaped their thinking in ways they no longer consciously recognized. In law schools and police academies, the case was sometimes mentioned briefly, a footnote in discussions about forensic evolution or investigative persistence. But the instructors who truly understood it emphasized something else. They spoke about restraint, about the danger of certainty, about the humility required to acknowledge that the truth may exist long before the means to prove it. The story of the quiet neighbor, once sensationalized, gradually lost its sharpness. His identity faded into documentation, his actions fixed but no longer actively discussed. This erosion of focus was not denial. It was normalization. The crime no longer demanded emotional reaction. It had been processed, absorbed into the collective understanding of what had happened. The family continued forward, not because the past had loosened its grip, but because standing still no longer felt necessary. They had learned to carry memory without letting it dictate motion. Their grief had become quieter, less volatile, but no less real. It existed now as texture rather than weight. They understood something that outsiders often missed, that the absence of mystery did not equal the presence of peace. The question had been answered, but the years shaped by its absence could not be undone. Lives had been lived in the shadow of not knowing, and that shadow had left its imprint. The town, now largely transformed, bore little resemblance to its 1994 self. New streets, new schools, new residents. Yet beneath the changes, the case remained embedded, a faint outline beneath layers of development. Those who knew its history sensed it in subtle ways, in caution during community discussions, in the measured tone used when speaking about crime, in the reluctance to assume safety without evidence. This collective restraint did not stem from fear. It came from experience. The town had learned that certainty is fragile, that appearances deceive, and that patience, though uncomfortable, is sometimes the only honest response to uncertainty. As years passed, the Ohio 1994 cold case became less about what had happened and more about what it had revealed. About institutions forced to evolve. About individuals forced to confront the limits of perception. About a community forced to live with a question long enough to be changed by it. In broader conversations about justice, the case occupied a quiet but persistent space. It challenged the idea that resolution is the ultimate goal. Instead, it suggested that integrity in the absence of resolution may matter just as much. That preserving truth, even when it cannot yet be accessed, is itself an act of responsibility. This perspective altered how people talked about other unsolved cases. There was less impatience, more acknowledgement of complexity, fewer demands for immediate answers, more support for sustained inquiry. The Ohio case had demonstrated that time does not automatically heal or reveal, but when paired with care, it can allow truth to surface without distortion. The phrase cold case itself took on a different meaning. It no longer implied neglect or abandonment. It implied dormancy, a state of waiting rather than forgetting. The Ohio investigation had shown that silence does not equal surrender. Even as the case settled into historical record, it continued to influence decisions quietly. Funding allocations, evidence retention policies, interagency cooperation. These changes were not dramatic, but they were durable. They reflected lessons learned not through theory, but through lived consequence. And still, the most enduring impact of the case could not be measured or cataloged. It existed in the way people learned to live with unanswered questions, in the acceptance that some truths arrive altered by time, carrying clarity without comfort, in the understanding that justice, when delayed, becomes something different, not diminished but reshaped. The Ohio 1994 cold case had not restored what was lost. It had not erased pain or rewritten history. What it had done was establish permanence. It had ensured that the truth, once reachable, would not be ignored, that the waiting, long and heavy, had not been meaningless. As the case moved fully into memory, it left behind no dramatic final note, no closing statement that neatly resolved its implications. Instead, it left a steady resonance, a low and enduring reminder that truth is not bound by urgency, and that responsibility does not expire with attention. In that resonance, the case found its final expression, not as a story demanding to be told again, but as a presence shaping how stories are told at all. A quiet influence, persistent and instructive, reminding those who listen closely that some answers arrive only after patience has done its work, and that what remains afterward is not closure, but understanding. An understanding, shaped by time and tempered by loss, was the last thing the Ohio 1994 cold case had to give. What remained, after everything else had settled, was not the case itself, but the silence it left behind, a different kind of silence than before, heavier, more deliberate, shaped by knowing rather than wondering. The Ohio 1994 cold case no longer asked questions. It observed. It lingered in the background of memory, no longer unresolved, yet never fully concluded in the way stories promise. For those who had lived through every phase of it, the silence carried texture. It was filled with images that no report could capture. The early search days marked by flashing lights and hope stretched thin. The long middle years defined by absence, by nothing happening loudly enough to be noticed. And finally, the late arrival of truth, quiet and undeniable, arriving without apology for its timing. This progression reshaped how people understood the word end. There was no moment when the story stopped. It simply lost momentum. Attention moved elsewhere. Lives continued. But the case remained present in subtler forms, surfacing when patience was tested, when assumptions felt too comfortable, when certainty arrived too easily. In professional circles, the Ohio case became a reference whispered rather than cited. It did not need to be explained in detail. Its meaning was understood by those who had studied enough to recognize it. A reminder that justice does not operate on schedules. That truth does not respond to urgency. That waiting, when done responsibly, is not failure. Younger investigators, encountering the case only through archived material, sensed its weight without fully grasping its emotional cost. They read the reports. They studied the timelines. But they had not lived inside the waiting. That distinction mattered. Experience had taught their predecessors that time alters not only evidence, but people. The family, now many years removed from the courtroom and the headlines, carried forward a version of the case that no longer required explanation. It existed within them as a known quantity. Painful, yes, but no longer volatile. They had learned that memory does not fade evenly. Some moments sharpen, others blur. Acceptance lies not in controlling this process, but in allowing it. They did not speak often about forgiveness or closure. Those words felt insufficient. Instead, they spoke about endurance, about the quiet strength required to continue living while a question remains unanswered for decades, and about the strange adjustment required when that question finally dissolves. The town story followed a similar arc. It did not celebrate the resolution endlessly. It absorbed it. The case became part of local history, referenced sparingly, handled with care. A lesson rather than a legend. A caution rather than a spectacle. There was an unspoken understanding that the case had changed the town permanently, not by making it fearful, but by making it aware. Aware that danger does not always announce itself. Aware that systems are human, and therefore imperfect. Aware that patience is not passive. It is an active choice that demands discipline. As years continue to pass, the Ohio 1994 cold case lost its immediacy but gained depth. Distance softened its edges without dulling its meaning. It became something people returned to not for answers, but for perspective. In broader cultural conversations about crime and justice, the case occupied a quiet but durable place. It stood as evidence that not all victories feel triumphant, that solving a case does not rewind time. That acknowledgement, while essential, is not the same as restoration. And yet, despite all of this, the case mattered. It mattered because it refused to disappear, because it proved that truth can survive neglect, because it showed that responsibility does not dissolve simply because years pass. The Ohio 1994 cold case waited 30 years to be heard. When it finally was, it did not shout. It spoke calmly, firmly, leaving behind not shock but certainty. A certainty that could not undo loss, but could prevent denial. That certainty settled into memory like a final layer of sediment, stabilizing what had once been turbulent. The question that had hovered for decades no longer needed to be carried. Its weight had been transferred into history. What followed was not relief, not triumph, but something quieter and more enduring. An understanding shaped by time, a respect for patience, a recognition that some stories do not conclude, they mature. And in that maturity, the Ohio 1994 cold case found its final form. Not as a mystery, not as a headline, but as a lasting reminder that truth, no matter how delayed, alters everything it touches, and that even after it arrives, the echoes of waiting remain, steady and unforgettable in the silence that follows.